I knew something was wrong the moment I saw his handwriting on that envelope. That's the line that still wakes me up at night. The image of my name, written in a shaky blue ink. Not the neat handwriting my husband Raymond used when he was proud of something, but a rushed, crooked scrawl, like he wanted to finish before his guilt caught up to him. My name. On a legal envelope, lying on the edge of the kitchen table like a forgotten sin. I remember the sunlight that morning. Warm, syrupy, crawling through the blinds and landing on the floorboards just the way my mama loved. She used to say a home that catches gentle light in the morning is a home blessed by God. But that morning, the light didn't feel like blessing. It felt like exposure. I stood there, barefoot, feeling the cold boards under my feet, holding a dish towel still damp from washing the breakfast dishes. I could smell the faint sweetness of cornbread lingering from the night before, mixed with the scent of the lemon soap I always used. Everything looked normal, perfect even, except for that envelope. I didn't open it right away. Something in me froze, like the way a deer stops mid-step when it senses danger. I whispered, "Lord, be with me," though I didn't even know why. I sat down at the table, the wood soft under my palms, worn from years of cooking, laughing, praying, and raising children around it, and I slid my finger under the flap. The paper inside was crisp, new, official. My eyes ran down the words slowly, each one knifing deeper than the last. Transfer of property. Mortgage agreement. Parcel 17B Walker Family Land. Signatory, Raymond H. Walker. I held the page so tight it started trembling between my fingers. My husband had mortgaged and sold a portion of my land, my family's land. The land Mama and Daddy worked themselves sick to leave for me. The land I nursed back into life after Daddy died. Every inch of pasture, every stubborn fence post, every fig tree planted by Mama's hands, gone. Handled. Signed away. And I didn't know a thing. I pressed my hand against my chest because suddenly I couldn't breathe right. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. The sound of the refrigerator humming behind me was suddenly too loud. The clock on the wall ticked at a speed I swore wasn't natural anymore. I remember muttering to myself, "This can't be real. This can't be real." Like repeating it would make the words rearrange into a better truth. I read the document again and again. And by the fifth time, I couldn't even see the letters clearly because my eyes were burning. Not from tears, not yet. From outrage, from disbelief. Because this wasn't just land. It was legacy. It was memory. It was everything my parents worked their lives for. Raymond wasn't supposed to touch it without me. He knew that. Everybody knew that. So why did he? I folded the paper back into the envelope as gently as I could, not because I respected it, but because I feared if I tore it, my anger wouldn't stop there. That's when the screen door creaked open behind me. Raymond stepped in smelling like diesel and old leather, boots thudding on the entry mat. He shook off the morning dust and looked at me, then at the envelope in my hand. He froze. His jaw tightened, not the guilty kind, no, the defensive kind. I had seen that look years ago, when we first started having trouble. "Morning," he said, voice low, cautious. I didn't say a word. His eyes flicked again to the envelope, and for a split second I saw it. Fear. A flicker so small he thought he hid it, but I caught it. "What's that you holdin'?" he asked. I placed the envelope flat on the table like a body laid down for identification. "You tell me." And Lord, the way he swallowed hard told me everything before he spoke. But he still tried to lie. It's probably nothing serious, he said. Some mix-up. Don't, I cut in. Raymond, please don't. He opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand, stopping him like I was stopping the very air from shifting. I whispered, Lord, be with me. How long? How long have you been touching my land without telling me? He blinked slow, deep, like a man picking his excuses from a shelf in his mind. You know I've been handling things, he said carefully. Bill's been hard, times ain't easy. I only did what was needin' doing. I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because disbelief sometimes takes the shape of laughter. It escaped my throat before I could swallow it down. What needed doing? I repeated. Selling my parents' land behind my back? That needed doing? His face hardened, the guilt bleeding into irritation. You don't understand the pressure on me, he snapped. You act like you're the only one who's got a say. But I'm the man of this house. I make decisions. Not with what ain't yours, I answered softly. Silence. Thick. Dangerous. He reached for the envelope, but I placed my hand on it first. Raymond, how much of it did you sell? His eyes darted to the window, then the floor. How much? His jaw worked. Just a few acres. How many? 7. My breath caught. 7. 7 acres. Almost a third of the lower field? I gripped the table until the wood pressed into my fingertips. Why, Raymond? And this man I shared a home and a life and a bed with, had the audacity to shrug. Because we needed money. And frankly, you don't manage money well. I've been cleaning up after your mistakes for years. I stared at him. And that was the moment I felt something inside me shift. Because he wasn't just lying. He was rewriting, twisting, preparing a story where I would be the careless one, the untrustworthy one, the thief, the villain. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope, it was just the first crack in a wall he'd been building for years. A wall meant to trap me, silence me, and blame me for everything he had done.
I stared at Raymond the way you stare at someone you suddenly realize you don't know. Not really. Not the way you thought you did. I had loved this man since I was 20. I had trusted him with my life, my home, my heart. But in that moment, standing in my kitchen with sunlight spilling across a betrayal he didn't even bother hiding well, I felt myself slip into a colder version of me. Not cruel, not mean, just awake. Raymond, I said quietly, don't you dare turn this on me. He scoffed, grabbed a cup from the cabinet, poured himself the last of the coffee I made before dawn. The audacity of that, taking comfort from a pot brewed by the same woman he was tearing apart. He sipped, not looking at me. You're making a big deal out of something that ain't one, he muttered. Ain't one? I whispered. He set the cup down harder than necessary. I said what I said. A tremor went through my hands before I could stop it. My mother's voice slipped into my mind, soft, southern, steady as a church bell. When a man chooses pride over truth, baby, he'll burn his own house down just to pretend he ain't cold. I inhaled slowly. Raymond? Who did you sell it to? He didn't answer. Who? I asked again, louder, calmer, scarier. That ain't important, he snapped. The deal's done. We got the money. That's all you need to know. My heart dropped. Because something in his tone, something mean, something practiced, told me he wasn't talking to me like his wife anymore. He was talking to me like an obstacle, a problem, a piece of land himself. You say we, I said, but it feels like only one of us is benefiting. He lifted his eyes then, and Lord, there it was. Not remorse, not panic, resentment, the kind that comes from years of building a private narrative no one else is aware of. You always act like everything around here gotta be decided by you, he muttered. I frowned. What are you talking about? You think because your parents left you land, you get to run things, he said. But this is my home too. I paid bills here, I worked here, I sacrificed. For what? I cut in. For me? Or for the version of yourself you're trying to protect? He slammed the coffee cup into the sink, leaving a brown splash across the counter. Don't start with your high and mighty tone, May. I blinked. May? He only used my name when he felt cornered. He only used that tone when he was preparing for a fight he'd already convinced himself he deserved to win. Raymond, what are you really hiding? I whispered. His whole body stiffened. And that's when I knew this wasn't about bills, or pressure, or finances. It was something deeper, darker, older. Something he never wanted me to find out, but before I could press more, the screen door creaked again, and in walked the one person who always sensed tension faster than lightning senses the ground. My son, Marcus. Tall, quiet, steady Marcus, with eyes that had seen too much heartbreak for someone his age. He set a grocery bag on the counter and looked between us. "What's going on?" he asked. Raymond immediately straightened his posture, clearing his throat. "Nothing," he said too fast. "Just talking." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Mom?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but the words caught. How do you tell your only son that the man he grew up watching wasn't who he pretended to be? Raymond stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. The gesture meant to look loving, reassuring, but I felt the pressure in it. The warning. "We're fine," Raymond said. "Ain't that right, babe?" I removed his hand gently, deliberately. "No," I said. "We're not." Marcus exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Okay, someone needs to talk, because I've been feeling tension for weeks." Weeks? The word hit me hard. So this wasn't new, not for Raymond, not for Marcus, just for me. "Mom," Marcus said softly, "tell me what's going on." Before I could speak, Raymond snapped. "Marcus, stay out of this." My son's face darkened. That rare look, the one that he inherited from me, the one that said, "I don't fight often, but I don't run either." "I'm not a kid," he replied, "and something's wrong." "Son," I finally said, my voice shaking despite my effort, "your father sold 7 acres of the lower field." Marcus blinked, then blinked again, slower. "Without telling you?" he whispered. I nodded. His jaw tightened, his fists curled. "Dad, what did you do?" he said quietly. Raymond scoffed. "Don't take her side before you know the facts." "There are no facts that make this okay," Marcus snapped. "You touched Mom's land." "It's our land," Raymond barked. "No," Marcus said, voice like steel. "It's not." The air in the kitchen turned heavy. Raymond's eyes narrowed, the veins in his neck rising. "You watch your mouth," he growled. Marcus stepped forward, not threatening, just standing taller. "Or what?" Marcus asked, not budging. "Or You'll what?" Marcus asked, not budging. "Explain why you lied? Why you hid it? Why you've been treating Mom like she's the problem in her own home?" Raymond's face reddened, not with shame, but with rage. "You don't understand what I'm dealing with," he gritted. "There's things your mother doesn't know." "Then tell her," Marcus snapped. Silence. A silence so sharp it felt like glass. Raymond's eyes darted again to the window, to the floor, to anywhere but me. Then he muttered, barely audible, "I can't." Those 2 words chilled me. Because they didn't sound like a man who was protecting me. They sounded like a man who was protecting himself. And whatever he was hiding was bigger than 7 acres, bigger than money, bigger than pride, bigger than us. I felt it, deep, heavy. truth waiting like a storm on the edge of our lives. Whatever came next was going to break something open. And once broken, nothing would be the same again.
Raymond stormed out after that. No warning, no explanation. Just grabbed his keys and walked out the door like the house had offended him. The sound of his truck engine roaring to life made the windows tremble. Then he peeled out of the driveway, tires scraping against gravel, dust lifting behind him like smoke. Marcus watched him go, jaw clenched so tight, I could see the muscle ticking near his temple. "Mom," he whispered, "this isn't right." I sank into a chair at the kitchen table. For a moment, I just stared at my hands resting in my lap, the faint tremble in them betraying how much I was holding back. "I know," I finally said. Marcus sat across from me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees the way he used to when he was a little boy waiting to hear if he was in trouble. "Has he been acting strange lately?" he asked. The question made something shift inside me, a memory. Faint, but there. A week ago, Raymond had come home late, smelling of cigarette smoke he claimed wasn't his. Before that, I'd found a crumpled envelope in the glove compartment with numbers written all over it, loan numbers by the look of them. And before that, I remember his sudden temper last month when I asked a simple question about the tax payment. At the time, I brushed them off. Life gets stressful, people get tired. But now they lined up like clues in a story I never wanted to read. "I thought it was stress," I whispered. "But now I'm not sure." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing my words. He didn't push, he didn't rush, just waited, the same way my father used to wait for rain on a stubborn summer day. "Mom," he said softly, "Dad's hiding something big." I closed my eyes. "I know." Another silence settled heavy, but not suffocating. This silence felt like truth preparing itself. Marcus's voice dropped lower. "What if this isn't just about the land?" My eyes opened sharply. "What do you mean?" He looked down at his hands. "I've been hearing things, Mom." A shiver ran down my spine. "Hearing what?" He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of wanting to protect me. That hesitation, that gentleness, it nearly broke me. "Your father, he's been going into town more than usual," he said. "And not for feed or parts. He goes to the other side of town. Near the—" He stopped. "The loan office?" I guessed. He nodded. "More than once." My stomach dropped like a stone tossed into a deep well. Loan office. That explained the papers, the secrecy, the tension that slithered around him like a second skin. But 7 acres wouldn't cover much. Unless he needed more. God help me. "Marcus," I whispered, "do you think he mortgaged more than what he sold?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. But the way he's been acting, I wouldn't rule it out." I stood slowly, gripping the table edge for balance. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls knew something I didn't. Marcus rose too, instinctively supporting me with his hand under my elbow. "Mom," he murmured, "we'll figure this out." I nodded, but I didn't feel steady, not at all. "I just need air," I whispered. We stepped out onto the porch together. The late morning sun warmed my skin, but my body felt cold. I watched the fields, the ones my parents spent decades nurturing, stretching wide and golden under the sky. 7 acres gone. Gone. Because the man I trusted all my life made a choice without me, against me. "Marcus," he said, breaking the quiet, "I need you to tell me something honestly." I looked at him. "Has he ever treated you badly? I mean, more than just raising his voice?" A strange heaviness filled my chest. For years, I told myself little lies, harmless ones, I thought. He's just tired. He's stressed. He didn't mean it like that. It wasn't that bad.
But now, with betrayal spread like ink across our land, those lies couldn't hold shape anymore. I swallowed. There were moments, I whispered. Not often, but enough that I learned when to stay quiet. Marcus closed his eyes like the answer hurt. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to see your father that way, I murmured, and I didn't want to believe it myself. We stood there for a long moment, the sound of wind brushing through the wheat field, the distant buzz of a tractor on someone else's land, the creak of the old porch swing shifting in the breeze. Then Marcus said something I didn't expect. "Mom," he said, "we need to get the deed." I turned to him. "The deed?" He nodded. "We need to see exactly what he did, how much he sold, how much he mortgaged, whether he forged anything." Forged? That word cut deeper than all the rest. "Marcus," I whispered, "do you think he'd—" "He don't know," he said gently, "but we can't rule anything out." I lowered myself onto the porch swing, gripping the armrest. My head was spinning. My husband, the man who once braided my hair on our wedding morning because my hands were too shaky, might have betrayed me in ways that went beyond secrecy, beyond lies, into something criminal. Marcus sat beside me. "I'll go into town and request copies from the county clerk. They'll give me the public filings." I nodded slowly. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." He placed a reassuring hand on my back. "I'm with you, Mom, no matter what we find." Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from the unexpected warmth of being believed, being protected, being seen. I wiped my face gently. "Drive safe," I said. He gave a small smile, tired but strong, then headed to his truck. The engine hummed softly, different from Raymond's angry roar. Calmer, steadier. I watched him drive down the road, dust rising behind him like a thin veil. Once he disappeared over the hill, I sat there alone, shoulders heavy, heart confused, mind racing. Because as much as I wanted answers, I wasn't sure I was ready for what they might uncover. I didn't know then, not fully, that we were only beginning to open the first door. Behind it lay many more, and each one held a truth darker than the last.
I never thought the smell of earth and rain could feel so bitter. That morning, I had walked across the field, boots sinking slightly into the soft soil, expecting the usual calm, familiar rhythm of my land. Instead, I found something that shattered the world I thought I knew. The letter was tucked under my doormat, plain, official, with a stamp from the county office. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper rustling louder than I expected in the silent house. My eyes scanned the words, disbelief pinching my chest. My husband, my partner, the man I had trusted with every dream I had about this land, had sold a portion of our farmland. He had done it behind my back, and somehow, in the twisted logic of his letter, I was the one accused of embezzling funds from our joint account. I remember the sharp taste of bile rising in my throat. The kitchen smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee, the bitter residue clinging to the mug I still held. I sank into the chair, gripping the counter edge until my knuckles went white, trying to make sense of the words that made no sense at all. When he walked in, the usual confident smile on his face faltered for the briefest moment, but quickly returned. "Did you get it?" he asked, casually, as if he had no idea the storm brewing in me. "Did I get what? The letter? The notice? You sold it?" I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. My chest heaved with anger, disbelief, and an aching sense of betrayal. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes calm. "Yes, and before you start with accusations, you should know they asked me because of some irregularities with our accounts. If anyone is to blame, it's you, not me." I froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe.
The words didn't just sting, they pierced me like cold metal. My husband, the man who had promised me partnership and trust, was twisting the truth, blaming me for the very crime he had committed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him until he admitted the truth. But instead, I felt the tremor in my hands and the tears threatening to spill. I saw, for the first time, the person I had married, the charming, gentle man who hid cunning and cruelty beneath the surface. You sold the land? I whispered, barely audible. My voice shook, and my mind replayed every conversation we had about this property, every smile he gave me as we dreamed together about planting more crops, adding a small orchard, and keeping my parents' legacy alive. Yes, I did what was necessary, he said, shrugging, as though it was ordinary, mundane, even responsible. And if we have financial problems, you should take responsibility for your part in them. My chest tightened. Responsibility? For what? For trusting him? For believing that love and honesty meant something? The next days were a blur of calls, letters, and mounting tension. The local offices confirmed it. Portions of the land had indeed been mortgaged and sold. Buyers had signed documents, and deeds had been transferred. I felt sick each time I looked at the official papers, the signature of my husband staring back at me like a blade. Everywhere I went in the house, reminders of the betrayal haunted me. The warm wooden floors, the smell of the kitchen after I baked bread, the faded curtains. The life we had built together now felt like a stage for lies. I would sit at the window watching the fields sway with the wind, imagining what was once ours now belonging to strangers. Arguments with him became frequent, escalating in subtle cruelty. He questioned my memory, my decisions, my very sanity. "Are you sure you didn't sign something? Maybe you forgot," he would say, voice calm but sharp, cutting deep. I had never felt so powerless. One evening, after another heated confrontation, I sat at the table with my hands clasped tightly around a cup of lukewarm tea. My body ached from tension, my mind a whirlwind of anger and fear. I realized that this wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about trust, about betrayal, about the foundation of our marriage crumbling beneath me. I could see it then, the path I would have to take. I would not be silent. I would not allow him to twist the story and destroy my name, my inheritance, and my dignity. But the first step I knew would be to face him, to confront him with the truth I had gathered, and prepare myself for the fight that would follow. The house seemed quieter that night. The shadows of the lamp stretched long across the walls, mirroring the long, dark road I now had to walk. And I knew, deep in my bones, that my life, as I had known it, peaceful, trusting, and warm, was over. I started noticing things I had overlooked before, small cracks in the carefully constructed life I thought I shared with him. At first, I tried to dismiss them, thinking maybe I was imagining problems where there were none, but the unease in my chest refused to leave. One morning, I walked into the study where he often kept his paperwork. I was searching for an old receipt for taxes when I noticed a folder shoved behind the ledger books. My curiosity piqued. I pulled it out. Inside were several official-looking documents, deeds, and contracts, all signed by him. As I flipped through them, my stomach twisted. Each page confirmed what I had feared. He had been methodically transferring portions of my land without my knowledge, carefully covering his tracks. The betrayal didn't just make my heart ache, it made my head spin. I sat on the floor, the folder open on my lap, staring at the neat, confident signature of the man I had loved and trusted for years. My hands shook, and the room felt impossibly hot. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, but I felt frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I tried to confront him, gently at first. "Why didn't you tell me about these transactions?" I asked one evening as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the smell of my simmering stew filling the air, grounding me in some semblance of normalcy. He gave me a slow, calculating look.
I didn't think it was necessary. You worry too much about things you don't need to. I handled it for us." His tone was almost soothing, but there was an edge there, a sharpness that made my skin prickle. I wanted to believe him, truly, I did. I wanted to trust the man I had married. But deep down, a voice in my head whispered that this wasn't care, this was control, and that whisper grew louder with each passing day, feeding the growing suspicion that I was being manipulated. Then came the incident with the bank statements. I had requested copies for personal review, hoping to understand the full scope of our finances. As I sat in the quiet living room, flipping through page after page, I noticed discrepancies, withdrawals and transfers I had never authorized. When I questioned him, he laughed softly, dismissing my concerns with a casual wave of his hand. "You're imagining things," he said, leaning back in the armchair, eyes watching me with mild amusement. "Why are you so obsessed with money all of a sudden? Don't you trust me?" The words stung sharper than any insult he could have thrown. Trust. How could I trust someone who had secretly sold pieces of the very land my parents had left me, the land I had believed was safe in our care? The more I tried to reconcile his calm demeanor with the evidence in my hands, the more I realized the pattern. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a strategy, careful, deliberate, and entirely self-serving. The land, the accounts, even my credibility, he had been quietly eroding all of it while presenting himself as the responsible, loving husband. Night after night, I lay awake, listening to the creaking of the old floorboards, replaying conversations in my mind, analyzing his every expression. Was he lying then? Was he lying now? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant hum of tension that I couldn't ignore. Then, one evening, a neighbor mentioned something casually, how a portion of the property I had once walked with my parents now belonged to someone else. The words hit me like a slap across the face. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, tears threatening to spill. The betrayal wasn't just in the papers or the bank statements. It was real, tangible, and spreading outwards into the community. I realized then that I had to be deliberate. I couldn't react blindly in anger, couldn't let the raw emotion dictate my actions. Every phone call, every document, every whispered word from the past was now a piece of a puzzle I had to solve. I began keeping notes, dates, signatures, conversations, small details that might seem irrelevant but were in fact vital. I knew that if this escalated, I would need proof. Not just for my own peace of mind, but for the possibility that I might have to defend my name, my inheritance, and my dignity in a way that left no room for manipulation. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set. Every object, every familiar smell, the faint scent of lavender from the hand soap, the warm, earthy aroma of the bread I bake, reminded me that life could still feel normal, even when chaos lurked beneath. It was grounding, yes, but also a stark contrast to the duplicity I had uncovered. And through it all, I held on to a quiet determination. I would uncover the truth piece by piece. I would confront the betrayal, not with blind fury, but with the calculated strength of someone who had loved deeply and been wounded deeply. And when the time came, I would make sure the world knew the full story, not just of my husband's deceit, but of my own resilience in the face of unimaginable betrayal. I realized something essential in those days. Suspicion was not weakness, it was awareness. And in a world where the people you trust most can hurt you the deepest, awareness was a shield I could not afford to lower.
I had prepared myself for confrontation, rehearsed my words, documented every irregularity. Yet nothing could have readied me for the evening when it all erupted. It started like any other night. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt onions as I stirred the soup simmering on the stove, the golden lamplight casting soft shadows on the walls. He walked in, carrying his usual smug expression, as if nothing in our life had shifted. But tonight, Something in his eyes, an unreadable mix of irritation and challenge, made my pulse quicken. I held up the folder of deeds and contracts I had painstakingly assembled. "We need to talk," I said, voice steady but low, almost trembling. He glanced at it and laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "What is this nonsense?" "This isn't nonsense," I said, placing the documents on the table. "You've been selling our land behind my back, mortgaging it, transferring ownership, all without telling me. And now you're accusing me of taking money from our accounts?" He took a step closer, his shadow stretching across the floor, a dark presence in the familiar kitchen. "You think you know everything, don't you?" he hissed, the calm veneer cracking to reveal something more dangerous underneath. I felt my stomach knot. I knew him well enough to sense when control was about to tip into aggression. "I know enough," I replied, voice trembling but louder this time. "I know enough to protect myself, and I won't let you manipulate the truth any longer." His eyes flicked to the stove, then back at me, and suddenly he lunged, not violently at first, just a harsh shove to the table that sent the folder sliding across the floor. Paper scattered, my heart hammered in my chest, the room spun around me, the faint scent of burnt onions mingling with the metallic tang of fear. I froze. "Don't," I said sharply, more to myself than him. But he didn't stop. Anger and accusation rolled off him in waves. "You think the land, the money, the life I built is yours to question?" "I'm not questioning," I said, standing taller despite the fear. "I'm demanding the truth." He laughed, a bitter, rasping sound. Then came the words that broke something inside me. "Maybe I should just say you stole it. Maybe that'll make everyone believe you're the liar here." For a moment, the room went silent. The clock ticked loudly, every second stretching like an eternity. I felt something crack in me, but it wasn't fear. It was resolve. All the months of quiet suspicion, late-night research, and documenting his actions had led to this. I could not let him rewrite reality. "You can't do that," I said, my voice firmer than I had expected. "You can't twist this. I have proof. I have records. And if you try to lie, the truth will come out. The world will see what you've done." He stopped, for the briefest moment, as if the words struck him. Then he sneered, retreating a step. "You'll regret this," he muttered, storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound reverberated through the walls, leaving a hollow ache behind. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching my hands together, trying to study the tremor in my body. The crisis had arrived, not as a sudden explosion, but as a culmination of months of betrayal. The person I had trusted most, the one I had built a life with, had revealed his true colors in full. That night, I couldn't sleep. The darkness of the bedroom pressed down on me, suffocating in its silence. I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, each tick of the wall clock marking the seconds of my restless thoughts. I thought of my parents, their hands calloused from tending the land I had inherited, their hopes for me, and I realized I had a choice: collapse under the weight of his deception or rise and confront it fully, no matter the cost. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I would gather every document, every record, if witness is necessary. I would not allow fear or manipulation to dictate my life any longer. The fight for justice would not just be about land or money. It would be about truth, dignity, and reclaiming control over a life that had been quietly stolen from me. And though I was trembling, exhausted, and broken in ways only betrayal can do, I felt a flicker of something strong and unyielding inside me. It was a quiet flame, but one that refused to die. That morning, I made my first real call to a lawyer, my fingers shaking as I dialed, my voice calm but resolute. "I need help," I said. "My husband has sold my land behind my back and now is trying to blame me. I need to fight back." As I hung up, the sun rose slowly, golden light spilling across the room. It felt like a small promise, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, there is light. And I clung to that promise, knowing the battle ahead would be long, but certain that I would not let deceit define the rest of my life.
The days that followed felt like walking through a fog. Every interaction with him became a minefield of lies, half-truths, and veiled threats. I discovered hidden bank statements tucked away in old drawers, notarized documents I'd never signed, and letters from real estate agents that mentioned sales I had never authorized. Each piece of paper felt like a punch to the chest. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, my hands trembling as I sifted through the stack. The smell of old paper mixed with the faint scent of his cologne, and it made my stomach churn. I realized with a sinking heart that this betrayal wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated. Every sale, every mortgage, every accusation against me had been orchestrated. He had spent months, maybe even years, planning this. When I confronted him with the evidence, I expected at least a shred of remorse. Instead, he leaned back on the couch, crossing his arms, a smug grin playing on his lips. "You're so dramatic," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Maybe if you'd been paying attention, you'd have seen this coming." "I paid attention," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "I trusted you. And you sold my family's land, our inheritance, and now you're trying to turn it on me. How can you live with yourself?" He laughed, a low, dark sound that made the room feel colder. "Live with myself? You have no idea what I've had to endure, with you nagging and questioning everything. If anything, I'm the victim here." For a moment, I felt dizzy. Was this the same man I had married? The one who had held me through sickness, celebrated birthdays, and whispered promises in the dark? How could someone so familiar become a stranger in such a cruel way? That night, I walked into the small study where I had kept my parents' journals and land deeds. I traced my fingers over the worn edges of each document, feeling the weight of history in my hands. I thought of my father, who had tilled this land from sunrise to sunset, and my mother, who had raised me with integrity and trust. I realized that while my husband had betrayed me, he could never erase the life and love that had gone into this land. Determined, I began organizing my evidence meticulously. Every bank transfer, every contract, every email. I made copies, took photographs, wrote detailed notes. My small kitchen table became the command center of my quiet rebellion. There was no room for fear, only facts. One afternoon, I found a particularly damning email, an agreement signed with a developer promising to transfer a large section of the farmland into commercial use, all without my knowledge. I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't just financial betrayal. This was a deliberate attempt to strip away my heritage, my roots, my identity. When I confronted him again, this time with printed copies of everything, he finally lost his composure. "You think you're so clever. You'll ruin everything for both of us. I cut him off, calm but icy. "No, I will not be silenced. I will not be blamed for your greed. If you go down, it will be because of your actions, not my words. And I will make sure the truth comes out whether you like it or not." The betrayal settled in my chest like a heavy stone, but it also sparked a fierce resolve. I wasn't just fighting for land or money anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, my family's legacy, and my own sense of justice. That night, I slept little. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the quiet anger simmering inside me. I knew the next steps would require more than evidence. They would require strategy, courage, and the ability to face the man I had once loved, now fully revealed as an adversary. By the following morning, I had made my decision. I would hire a lawyer, not out of vengeance, but to ensure that the truth was exposed in full. I would reclaim what was mine, and in the process, I would learn how to protect myself from anyone who tried to rewrite reality. The journey ahead would be long and exhausting, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of purpose.
My parents' land, my inheritance, my life, none of it would be stolen without a fight. And though the betrayal cut deep, I was no longer the quiet, unsuspecting woman I had once been. I had awakened, and I would not rest until justice was done.
The following weeks were a blur of phone calls, appointments, and quiet determination. I had always been a private person, someone who preferred to solve problems at home with words and patience. But this was different. This was no longer about compromise or forgiveness. It was about survival and justice. I remember walking into the law office for the first time, the smell of polished wood and leather-bound books filling my senses. The receptionist smiled politely, unaware of the storm I carried inside me. Sitting across from the attorney, I laid out everything: bank statements, contracts, emails, notarized letters, and even the small notes I had scribbled in my kitchen late at night. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady. I need help. He has sold our land without my knowledge, and now he's trying to blame me. The attorney listened carefully, nodding, occasionally jotting something down. Her calm professionalism was reassuring, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. She explained the legal options, the steps we could take to freeze transactions, investigate the sales, and reclaim what was mine. It sounded overwhelming, but also possible. Returning home that evening, I noticed how quiet the house felt without his constant interruptions. The air smelled faintly of evening rain through the open window, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. I walked through the fields that were still partially mine, running my hands over the tall grass and broken soil. Memories of my parents' hard work filled my mind, their laughter, their songs, their pride. I promised myself I would honor them, no matter what. My husband, sensing a shift in my demeanor, began his usual manipulation tactics. He criticized, threatened, and even tried to isolate me from friends and family. "You're making a fool of yourself," he said one evening, slamming a chair against the wall. "Everyone will think you're crazy for fighting me." But this time, I didn't flinch. I had found allies, lawyers, friends, even distant relatives who believed in justice. I had learned that speaking out, documenting everything, and seeking support wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the only way forward. Each day I spent preparing for the courtroom, reviewing documents, and strategizing with my attorney, I felt stronger. My anger transformed into clarity. I no longer felt the crushing weight of betrayal alone. I was building a network, a foundation to fight back. And in a strange way, I began to see the betrayal not just as a wound, but as a catalyst for my own growth. At home, I started reclaiming small spaces for myself: my study, the kitchen, even the living room. I organized my parents' memorabilia, hung photos that reminded me of my roots, and tended to the small garden patches that still survived. Each act was quiet defiance, a declaration that my life and legacy were not for him to destroy. Sleep came fitfully, often interrupted by dreams of the courtroom and heated arguments. Yet, in the quiet hours, I found moments of reflection. I wrote letters I would never send, pouring my grief and anger onto paper. I remembered my parents' voices. "Integrity matters more than comfort, child." Those words became my mantra. I began reaching out to neighbors and community members, not for gossip, but for support and witness statements. It was humbling and empowering at once. People I had known casually were willing to help me stand up against someone they also had doubts about. The simple gestures, a sympathetic nod, a shared memory, a handwritten letter, reminded me that no one should face betrayal alone. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, I felt a small but profound sense of peace. I knew the path ahead would be grueling, that the courtroom would be a battlefield, and that the fight could change everything. But I also knew that for the first time since discovering the betrayal, I was no longer acting out of shock or fear. I was acting with purpose, clarity, and the unwavering belief that truth would prevail. As I looked out over the land, imagining the rows of crops my parents had planted and the fields my hands would continue to care for, I whispered quietly to myself, This is not over, and I will not lose what is rightfully mine.
The day I decided to confront him directly was not marked by fanfare or anger. It was quiet, deliberate, and cold. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, lining up witnesses, and building a case that would leave no room for his lies. When I approached him, he was sitting in the living room, sipping his morning coffee, completely unaware of the storm that had been quietly brewing in my mind. "I want answers," I said calmly, placing a folder thick with documents on the table between us. He raised an eyebrow, feigned a casual smile, as if the stack of papers were just another inconvenience. "What are these?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I held his gaze steadily. "These are records of the land you sold. Every mortgage, every transfer, every signature, and it all points to actions taken without my knowledge or consent." My voice was low, but unwavering. I noticed a flicker in his eyes, an almost imperceptible twitch that betrayed the casual mask he tried so hard to maintain. He laughed lightly, the sound brittle, like dry branches snapping in a storm. "You're imagining things," he said. "I did what needed to be done. You've always been too sentimental to understand business." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't back down. "Business? This was my inheritance, our family's legacy, and now you've turned it into a weapon, blaming me for your actions. That ends today." For the first time in our marriage, I saw fear in him, subtle, but there. He tried to speak, but I continued, my voice rising not with anger, but with undeniable authority. "I've spoken with the attorney. I've collected evidence. I've spoken to neighbors and community members. The truth is coming out, and there is no way you can rewrite it." He slammed his coffee cup onto the table, the ceramic shattering, splashing dark liquid onto the hardwood floor. "You think you can fight me?" he spat, his tone sharp, dangerous. "You'll lose everything. You'll regret this." I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "No, I won't. You might control words, fear, and manipulation, but you do not control the truth, and you do not control me." He rose from his chair abruptly, looming over me. For a moment, I feared he might strike out, but something had shifted in the energy of the room. He realized I was no longer the woman he could intimidate. I was focused, prepared, and unwilling to cower. I left the living room calmly, walking to my study, closing the door behind me. Inside, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "Step 1, evidence secured. Step 2, witnesses ready. Step 3, court filing tomorrow." Each step was methodical, deliberate. I was no longer reacting emotionally, I was reacting strategically. That evening, I notified the local authorities and filed a preliminary complaint. The look on his face when the police officer read the summary of the complaint was priceless, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and suppressed anger. He tried to protest, to charm, even to threaten, but it was no longer effective. I had prepared too well, moved too carefully, and acted with clarity and authority he had never anticipated. Over the next few days, I visited neighbors and family members again, explaining the situation calmly, presenting documents, and answering questions. Each conversation reinforced my confidence. People who had been hesitant to speak now felt empowered to come forward, corroborating details I had carefully recorded. Late one night, I sat alone in the kitchen looking over the moonlit fields and reflected on the transformation within me. Betrayal had pushed me into a corner, yes, but it had also drawn out a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned to harness fear, anger, and grief into precise action, and I was no longer a passive participant in my life. The following morning, I filed the official case in court. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper, polished wood, and old varnish, a place where justice was formally declared, yet often emotionally taxing. I walked in with the folder of documents in hand, feeling the weight of history, responsibility, and determination. This was my parents' legacy, my inheritance, and my life. I wasn't going to let it slip away under a veil of lies. When my husband entered the courtroom, his expression was carefully neutral, but I could sense the tension radiating beneath. He had always relied on fear, charm, and deception to get his way, but this time, every tactic had been anticipated, every lie documented, every story corroborated. As the proceedings began, I took a deep breath and looked around the courtroom. Faces of neighbors, friends, and even distant relatives who supported me gave a quiet reassurance. I realized then that this wasn't just about the land or the betrayal. It was about reclaiming my voice, dignity, and sense of justice. And nothing could take that away.
The courtroom was heavy with anticipation, the air thick with quiet murmurs and the subtle scrape of chairs. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but I kept my gaze forward, calm, collected. Today, the truth would no longer be a private burden. It would be exposed to everyone who mattered, to the very community that had once whispered in doubt. When the judge called the case, my husband tried to mask his discomfort with a polite smile, but I saw it, the twitch of his jaw, the subtle shifting of his hands. He was used to controlling perception, but control was slipping through his fingers. My attorney, a patient woman with an unyielding presence, began laying out the evidence. Every document, every signature, every witness account I had gathered was presented clearly and meticulously. My husband's smirk faltered with each revelation. The audience leaned in, their expressions oscillating between disbelief, shock, and moral outrage. "Your Honor," my attorney said, her voice steady, "the defendant has systematically sold portions of the plaintiff's inherited property, using misrepresentation and false accusations to shift blame and conceal his actions." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We have records, witnesses, and signed documents proving these transactions occurred without consent." I watched as my husband's face paled, his carefully rehearsed defenses unraveling like old wallpaper. He attempted to speak, to object, to charm the room, but it was futile. The courtroom, a place usually deferential to bravado, now mirrored the reality I had been carrying in silence for months. He had betrayed trust, family, and integrity. Neighbors and family members were called to testify. One by one, they recounted their observations, how he had spoken in secrecy, his insistence that I was mistaken or imagining things, and the pattern of deceit that had allowed him to manipulate the household. Each testimony was a quiet hammer strike, forging a path toward truth. I felt a strange mix of emotions: vindication, sorrow, relief, and grief, all blending together in a warm, sharp ache. It was a moment I had feared for years, yet had also meticulously prepared for. The courtroom wasn't just about proving wrongdoing. It was about reclaiming my dignity, honoring my parents' legacy, and asserting the principle that betrayal cannot flourish unchallenged. When the judge finally spoke, his voice resonated with the weight of authority and calm discernment. After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony, it is clear that the defendant acted without consent and in breach of trust. The transactions in question are hereby declared invalid, and the property shall remain under the rightful ownership of the plaintiff. Furthermore, restitution shall be arranged for any financial discrepancies caused by the defendant's actions. A hush fell over the courtroom. My husband's face had gone from disbelief to a muted, defensive rage. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest or manipulate again, but the judge's gavel struck firmly, and the room settled into a quiet resolution. Outside the courthouse, whispers of the case had already begun to ripple through the neighborhood. People looked at me with a newfound respect, a recognition of courage that I hadn't sought but deeply appreciated. Some offered quiet congratulations, others simply nodded in silent solidarity. For the first time in months, I felt the release of truth, lifting the tension I had carried like a hidden stone in my chest. That evening, as I walked back to my home, the field stretched before me under a golden sunset. Each blade of grass, each gentle sway of the crops reminded me of what was truly at stake: heritage, hard work, and the values my parents had instilled in me. It wasn't just land. It was memory,
It was life, it was identity. At dinner, I sat with a quiet sense of closure, the usual tension of sharing space with my husband, replaced by a cautious but tangible distance. He no longer commanded the room with deception. His authority had been stripped, replaced by accountability. The betrayal that once felt insurmountable now existed as a documented chapter of the past. That night, as I prepared for bed, I sat by the window, gazing at the soft moonlight illuminating the farmhouse. The silence was profound, but not lonely. It carried with it the weight of lessons learned, the bittersweet relief of vindication, and the subtle warmth of justice realized. I realized then that public consequence wasn't about humiliation, it was about truth. It was about making visible what had been hidden in shadows, about showing that integrity and patience could overcome deceit, and that courage, even when quiet, could rewrite the course of a life. The day had ended not with anger or vengeance, but with a measured dignity, a clear statement that betrayal, no matter how calculated, could not withstand persistence, evidence, and moral clarity. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe fully. The weight of injustice finally eased.
The days after the courtroom felt surreal, like stepping out of a storm into a still, golden morning. I wandered through the fields I had fought so hard to protect, feeling the soil between my fingers, the scent of fresh earth filling my senses. It was mine again, fully, without condition. And yet the real restoration wasn't just about property. It was about reclaiming my own sense of peace and identity. I began to rebuild the farmhouse with intention. Small repairs at first, the squeaky hinges, the peeling paint, the crooked fence. Each task, each careful stroke of paint, was a way of reclaiming not just the land, but the rhythm of life that my husband had tried to disrupt. I planted flowers along the edges of the porch, their blooms a quiet rebellion against the years of deceit, a daily reminder that life could still be gentle, beautiful, and deliberate. Friends and family came by, some quietly, some with careful congratulations. I realized that part of healing wasn't isolation. It was allowing myself to accept support and love. My son, who had watched the ordeal from the sidelines, hugged me tightly one afternoon. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't know how you did it, but I've never been prouder." That moment, soft and unassuming, grounded me more than any court victory ever could. I also began documenting everything: the betrayal, the financial records, the emotional toll, not for revenge, but to ensure that truth could be remembered and lessons shared. Each page, each careful note, felt like a stitch in the tapestry of healing. The narrative of my life was mine to write, and I was determined it would carry dignity, clarity, and honesty. Evenings were the hardest at first. Silence carried echoes of arguments, accusations, and mistrust. But slowly, I learned to fill it with reflection instead of tension. I lit candles in the living room, listened to the wind rustle through the trees, and let myself feel the simple act of being present. There was sorrow, yes, but there was also a quiet joy in survival, in choosing grace over anger, and in realizing that life could still move forward despite betrayal. I returned to routines I had long neglected, preparing meals with care, tending to the animals, walking through the fields to inspect crops. Each act was a meditation, a quiet reclaiming of my body, my mind, and my sense of purpose. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about freeing myself from the poison of lingering resentment. And so, in private moments, I let it go, even as I remained vigilant in protecting what was rightfully mine. One morning, as sunlight poured across the farmhouse kitchen, I poured myself a cup of tea and watched the dew shimmer on the grass. The land looked unchanged, but it felt different in my hands. It had been tested, almost stolen, and yet here it was, resilient. And so was I.
I began speaking quietly with neighbors and friends about the importance of protecting inheritance, documenting agreements, and trusting intuition. I shared my story not for spectacle, but to offer guidance to prevent others from enduring similar betrayals. Every conversation reminded me that my journey wasn't just personal. It had the power to ripple outward, shaping understanding, awareness, and courage in others. Months later, I found myself sitting on the porch, a notebook open on my lap. I wrote down the memories, the heartbreak, the confrontation, and the slow reclamation of life. Each word carried both pain and triumph, a testament to resilience and moral clarity. I paused often, listening to the soft sigh of wind through the trees, feeling a connection to something larger than myself. The legacy of integrity, endurance, and the quiet strength of the human heart. By the time the season changed, I no longer felt the shadow of betrayal looming. I had reclaimed not just my property, but the right to trust myself again, to move through the world with dignity and awareness. The farmhouse, once a symbol of conflict, had become a sanctuary, a place where lessons were etched in the soil, in the walls, and in the heartbeat of daily life. I understood then that healing wasn't instantaneous. It was cumulative, woven through small victories, daily choices, and the quiet courage to continue. The man who had betrayed me remained in the background of my life, but he no longer dictated its course. I was free in ways I had never anticipated, not just from deceit, but from fear, from doubt, and from the weight of others' opinions. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon one evening, painting the fields in shades of amber and gold, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the land, for the life that endured, for the clarity I had earned, and for the lesson that even in betrayal, there is the opportunity to reclaim oneself, one's dignity, and one's future.
I often sit on the porch as the sun sets, letting the golden light spill across the fields, thinking about how fragile trust can be and how fierce a woman must be to reclaim what's hers. The betrayal I endured could have broken me completely, yet somehow it became the catalyst for my own awakening. Sometimes I close my eyes and replay those moments, the shock of discovering he sold the land, the twisting of truth when I confronted him, the courtroom's sterile walls where justice was finally served. And then I remind myself that none of it defines me. What defines me is how I chose to respond, with courage, patience, and unwavering commitment to integrity. I've learned that life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. People we love and trust can falter, and sometimes the ones closest to us can hurt us the most. But betrayal, as painful as it is, can also reveal strength we didn't know we had. It forces us to examine our values, our boundaries, and the depth of our resilience. Rebuilding wasn't just about reclaiming my land, it was about reclaiming myself. Every repaired wall, every planted tree, every careful note I wrote about the experience was a reminder that healing is active, intentional work. And as I nurtured the soil, I nurtured my own heart as well. I think often about the choices I made, especially when it came to confronting him, protecting my inheritance, and seeking justice without losing my composure. It was not easy. It required courage to speak truth in the face of lies, to act in the shadow of fear, and to trust that the universe would align in favor of honesty and perseverance. And it did. To anyone watching this, especially those who may feel betrayed, undervalued, or unheard, your story is valid. Your voice matters. And even in the darkest moments, there is a path to reclaim your dignity and peace.
I share my journey not to boast, but to illuminate that path, to show that justice and healing are possible and that resilience is an inner power waiting to be claimed. I also want to remind you that forgiveness is not always about the person who hurt you. It's about releasing the hold they have on your soul. You don't need to condone the actions of those who betray you. You only need to protect your own heart. As I sip my tea and watch the shadows lengthen across the land that is truly mine, I feel a deep sense of calm. I feel grounded. I feel the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with honesty and of battles fought with courage and dignity. The scars of betrayal remain, yes, but they are reminders of lessons learned, not burdens carried. So I ask you, dear listener, have you ever faced someone you trusted only to find they turned against you? How did you reclaim your strength, your peace, and your voice? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you navigated betrayal, reclaimed your life, and found healing. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own resilience, please like, subscribe, and support these real-life tales every week. Because stories like ours, stories of betrayal, courage, and reclamation, deserve to be told, remembered, and honored.